Buenos días, vecinos. Behind me you can see La Capilla de Nuestra Señora de los Dolores. This is the oldest church in Bucaramanga. It was built in 1773. It might even be the oldest building in Bucaramanga, but we'll call it the oldest church and the oldest building in Bucaramanga. Inside are the remains of three of Bucaramanga's most prestigious citizens: Father Eloy Valenzuela, Father Francisco Romero, and the poet Aurelio Martínez Mutis. Today I'm going to be talking about the 20th century Colombian poet Aurelio Martínez Mutis. He's got a great story. I hope you like it. And at the end of the video, I'm going to take a closer look at some of his poetry and kind of show you what it's like. Behind me you can see Calle 36, 36th Street here in Bucaramanga. But not a lot of people know that from Carrera 11 to Carrera 15, that's 11th Avenue to 15th Avenue, the official name for this street is Calle Aurelio Martínez Mutis. So if you haven't studied 20th century Spanish literature, you might not know who Aurelio Martínez Mutis is. But let me assure you, he is one of the greatest Colombian poets of the 20th century. And he was born right here in Santander. Aurelio Martínez Mutis, or Aurelio as most people call him, was born in 1884. He was born to a very rich, old, well-established family. His ancestor, Manuel Mutis Bocillo, was born in Cadiz and immigrated to Santander in the 1760s. Un dato curioso, two of the oldest and most important buildings in the early history of Bucaramanga were built by Aureliano's ancestor Manuel. The building that we know today as La Casa de Bolivar, which is a museum now, and the building you see behind me, La Casa de Luis Perú de la Croix, which is an art gallery. Otro dato curioso, this ancestor, Manuel, was the brother of José Celestino Mutis, better known as El Sabio Mutis. El Sabio Mutis was a fascinating character in Colombian history. You can think of him as kind of a cross between Ben Franklin and Carl Linnaeus in Colombia. He was a really important figure in the Enlightenment here in the New World. He died in 1808 before the Colombian Revolution happened, but he was very instrumental in mentoring a lot of these young minds that went on to overthrow the Spanish crown. Aurelio himself was very proud to be able to trace his ancestry back to El Sabio Mutis. So when Aurelio was old enough, his family sent him off to Chile to study in Santiago. That's where he studied literature and pedagogy. Though he was always known as an intelligent kid, a really gifted writer, when he was in Chile is when he really started to embrace the Modernismo literary school. And it was led by Rubén Darío. If you're like me and you haven't studied Spanish literature, the name Rubén Darío might not mean much to you. But he is definitely one of the most important people in the history of Spanish writing. He's right up there with Cervantes, Neruda, Lope de Vega, José Martín. He was born in Metapa, Nicaragua. It's a town you can't even find on a map anymore. Why? Because in 1920, they renamed the town Darío. Before Rubén Darío and a Modernismo movement, Spanish language poetry was really concrete. It had a lot of rigid rules. It was really formulaic. There were only certain topics you were supposed to talk about. Rubén Darío came along and he used flowery, eloquent language. He broke a lot of these rules. People who I know who study Spanish literature tell me that there's a definite line before and after Rubén Darío and his Modernismo movement. So I'm going to show you an example of before and after Rubén Darío and his Modernismo movement so you can kind of see the difference. Rubén Darío had his big breakthrough in 1888 when he published a book of poetry called Azul. This launched him onto the international stage and started a whole new movement that he called Modernismo. So Aurelio wrote some good pieces in regional Colombian journals, cultural reviews. He was recognized locally in Chile and in Colombia, but he really jumped onto the scene in 1913 in Paris. In the decade before World War I was one of Paris's heydays. At the turn of the century, lots of artists and people who would later become cultural icons were flocking to Paris. People thought, it's the 20th century, it's the modern world, the hell with your grandfather's art, we're a new generation of young artists, we're going to do everything different. You had people like George Braque and Picasso. They invented Cubism, and at the time, nobody knew what the hell to make of that. There was Guillaume Apollinaire who decided, let's just get rid of punctuation. Latinos like Diego Rivera, Roberto de la Selva, Enrico Gomez Carrillo, they were in Paris too. Even Americans like Man Ray and Ezra Pound were coming to Paris. This is when Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas started their Saturday salons that would become famous later in the 1920s. If you were an educated, elite, cultured person at the time, you had to come to Paris. And if you were a Spanish speaker, you read El Mundial. El Mundial was a Spanish language magazine based in Paris. Didn't last very long, only about 5 years, I think 1911 to 1916, but it had a huge influence. El Mundial was an expensive magazine, printed with glossy pages. It had beautiful art, photography, literature, articles about current events, social commentary, politics. Anybody who was elite and cultured read this magazine. The literary director for this great magazine was none other than our protagonist from Nicaragua, Rubén Darío. In 1913, El Mundial magazine sponsored an international poetry contest. There were certain parameters, of course. Had to be in Spanish, had to have 365 lines. There were certain suggested themes. And one big aspect of this poetry contest is all the submissions were anonymous. This was very important because part of the artistic movement of the time was the idea that anybody could be an artist no matter who he came from. They didn't want to have any name recognition. Aurelio Martínez Mutis won this contest from El Mundial with his fantastic poem, La Epopeya del Cóndor, the Epic of the Condor. This is a powerful anti-imperialist epic, celebrates Latin American sovereignty, warns against foreign intervention, and exalts the continent's majestic landscape and untamed spirit. Well, Aurelio won this contest from El Mundial, and it shocked the Spanish literary world. Not just because it was such a great poem, very well constructed, great themes, great topic, but he was a relatively unknown young man, only 29 years old at the time. And he wasn't a graduate, he wasn't a scholar from the great universities of Madrid or elsewhere in Europe. He wasn't even from Mexico City, which is also pretty well respected. He was from Colombia. No, not Bogota, Colombia. Bucaramanga, Santander. Where the hell is that? Nobody knew. He was young, unknown, but a great writer nonetheless. This was just a surprise and a shock to the Spanish literary world at the time. I would love to tell you about the great collaboration between Rubén Darío and Aurelio Martínez Mutis, but unfortunately for Spanish poetry lovers, the two never worked together. Darío was in pretty poor health, and he died in 1916. After the contest, Aurelio went back to South America, where he spent his time between Chile and Colombia. He taught at various universities like La Universidad de Nariño in Pasto and La Universidad Nacional in Bogotá. Eventually, he settled down in Santiago, Chile. That's where he was living in 1920 when he wrote another of his epic poems, La Esfera Conquistada. Okay, and so in Punta Arenas, Chile in 1920, there was a poetry contest to commemorate the 400th anniversary of the discovery of the Strait of Magellan during the first ever voyage all the way around the world. Aurelio submitted a 275-line poem. It's divided up into 14 stanzas, all about Magellan's crew, about their journey across the ocean, discovery of the strait, and their eventual return to Spain after almost 3 years at sea. They were the first people to ever navigate the entire globe, and they wouldn't have been able to do it if they hadn't found the Strait of Magellan. For this poem, Aurelio won first place in the International Poetry Contest, and it really solidified his position in the world as a master of Spanish epic poetry. In his final decades, o sea, in the 1940s and 50s, Aurelio lived in Paris as a diplomat for the Colombian government. There, he worked as a cultural ambassador, giving lectures, hosting events, translating, and promoting Hispanic culture. He died of natural causes at the age of 70 in 1954 in Paris. His remains were brought back from Paris to Bucaramanga, and he's interred right here in the church you see behind me, La Capilla de Nuestro Señor de los Dolores. This little door you see here on the side leads to a small memorial garden. This church and the gardens are almost never open, so I can't take you back there. One time I just happened to be walking by here and the church was open, the gardens were open, so I was lucky enough to get inside, take a few pictures. It was just a very lucky coincidence. Nice, intimate, very small, very pretty. So when you read Aurelio's poetry, there's certain themes that he keeps coming back to again and again. And I'm going to talk about two of them. The first thing that really jumps out at me is the ornate, over-the-top way he talks about Latino America. Historical figures, historical events, the landscape. He talks about everything this way. It reminds me a lot of the romantic poets like Shelley and Byron, or the way the Greek poets like Homer would write about the Odyssey. And here's a passage where he talks about Colombian history as if we're part of some long, grandiose, epic story.
En este pasaje sobre la famosa batalla del Pantano Vargas, Aurelio pinta una imagen realmente grandiosa. Bolívar se convierte en la fuente espiritual de donde proviene Colombia.
Kind of reminds me of the way Homer would write about the Trojan War. So in this way, Aurelio puts Hispanic culture up on the same level as like Greek and Roman culture. It's epic, it's grandiose, it's majestic, it's noble, it's hispanidad. He writes about everything this way. The mountains, the rivers, the streams, the valleys. He uses images like the Cóndor and the Andes Mountains as symbols for the majestic Hispanic character. I especially like the way he talks about the landscape of Santander because, like Aurelio, I'm also in love with Santander. Check out these passages, the way he talks about the Colombian landscape. Oh, it's just amazing.
Aurelio habla de los ríos, montañas y bosques de Santander como símbolos nobles y distintivamente santandereanos.
Another theme that Aurelio keeps coming back to in his writings is this concern about U.S. intervention in Latin America and how dangerous it is for independence and sovereignty. You might think being worried about the United States taking over places like Greenland or the Strait of Hormuz or Panama is something recent, but no, this fear goes back a long time, especially in Latin America. And Colombia has kind of a special history with the United States meddling in its affairs, going all the way back to 1903 with the loss of Panama. If you don't know this part of history, I'll give you the basic, oversimplified version. In 1903, the land that today we call Panama was part of the country of Colombia. In November of that year, there was an uprising. A separatist group staged a coordinated, bloodless coup and declared the country independent. The government in Bogotá sent soldiers up there, put down the rebellion, take back Panama, but when they got there, the troops couldn't land. Why? Because the American Navy had blockaded all the ports. The independence movement, the insurrection, the rebellion, whatever you want to call it, it was ultimately successful. And it wasn't too long before the independent Republic of Panama was recognized. In Colombia, people consider this loss of about 6% of its territory as a direct result of the United States getting involved in an internal struggle where they really shouldn't have been involved with in the first place. Aurelio was only 19 at the time, and clearly this made a big impression on him. And then from the 19-teens up until the 20s and 30s, there was the U.S. occupation of Nicaragua, Haiti, La Dominicana, and obviously the Banana Massacre in Ciénaga in 1928. So I think you can see why in Latin America there was a lot of concern about the big superpower to the north. Here are a few lines from La Epopeya del Cóndor when you can see Aurelio's anti-imperialist position.
Aurelio afirma que los valores que representa la bandera estadounidense no concuerdan con la forma en que Estados Unidos actúa hoy en día. Califica a Estados Unidos como un dragón imperial y hambriento.
And in this passage, Aurelio compares the U.S. empire to Attila and the Huns who overran Europe 1,500 years ago.
Aquí, Aurelio habla de la expansión estadounidense en México y la compara con los bárbaros de Attila, que también buscaban la conquista.
Now, I studied English language literature about 10 lifetimes ago. I was still an undergrad in Wisconsin back then. So when I was doing investigation for this video, and I learned about a poet who uses ornate language, extreme love for his homeland, worried about a superpower and infringing on his sovereignty, it reminded me of another poet that I know, William Butler Yeats. Yeats was Irish, about a generation older than Aurelio, and not even remotely connected to the same literary schools. But I think they have a lot in common. Of course, they had different methods to get their message across, but at the end of the day, both of these poets were seeking to define who their people are, where they came from, and what historical inheritance binds them together. One way that they were similar is they both had an intense love for the landscape where they lived. I've already shown you how Aurelio talks about Colombia. Look at these passages and see how Yeats talks about Ireland.
Yeats está tan apegado al paisaje irlandés como Aurelio a los Andes y Santander. Innisfree se convierte en una visión idealizada de Irlanda. Ben Bulben es para Yeats lo que los Andes son para Aurelio. No solo una montaña, sino un símbolo de la historia, la mitología y la identidad de un pueblo.
they also had a tendency to write about historical events and historical figures, like in these examples.
Yeats celebra la historia irlandesa a través de la poesía. Aquí conmemora a los líderes del levantamiento de Pascua.
And finally, both men had serious concerns about their own national sovereignty. Aurelio was more worried about the great American superpower, and for most of Yeats's life, his country had no sovereignty at all. Look at these lines from Yeats criticizing how the British treated his people.
Yeats acusa directamente a las fuerzas británicas de asesinar a civiles inocentes y de eludir la justicia. Yeats afirma que el dominio del Imperio Británico, el Garden Lord, ha marchitado Irlanda y que solo un sacrificio total puede restaurar la nación.
I have no idea if William Butler Yeats and Aurelio Martínez Mutis ever met, but I'm sure if they did, they would have a lot to talk about. Entonces, vecinos, espero que hayan gustado este video. Aurelio Martínez Mutis is a really interesting character, really fascinating person to learn about. I learned a lot making this video. I'd like to give a special shout out to my friend Darío Castillo Quintero. Darío is a writer, an investigator, a historian, a director here at La Casa del Libro Total, and a virtual encyclopedia of all things Santander. Without his help, this video would have been a lot more boring. Darío, gracias por tu apoyo, gracias por su colaboración, gracias por resolver todas las preguntas que tenía. Sin usted y su ayuda, este video no habría sido posible. Muchas gracias, mano. Chao, vecinos, que estén muy bien.